Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Empowerment Project podcast. I'm Andrea Bosco.
And I'm Dr. Rai. How are you?
Hello. Thank you all for being here today. We have two amazing guests with us today. Before I introduce them, I want to talk about the organization that they're here representing. It's called Harmony Movement. So, Harmony Movement was established in 1994 as a nonprofit organization to combat interracial intolerances and to confront the us versus them attitude, which was really prevalent in the Canadian society at the time. So now Harmony Movement provides interactive diversity and equity education programs that empower and inspire youth, educators, and those in the social service sector to help them develop that equity lens, empathy, respect, and leadership skills to provide social change. They encourage critical thinking, courageous conversations, and strategy building to address and take action against stereotypes, prejudice, discrimination, racism, and other forms of oppression. So today we have Taraneh and Shafiq from the organization, and we're just so grateful to have you guys with us today.
Thanks, Andrea.
We're happy to be here.
Yeah, so just a little background. We were doing a event at a high school, and it was like a DEI symposium, and we were invited to go as the Empowerment Project. And then I met Taraneh, and she was there doing something as well. We weren't in the same session, but we kind of met up in the common area where all the presenters were. And I think it sort of was like a bit of an instant connection. And we were really interested in learning about each other's work. As even just from the description, you can tell we have a lot of aligned attitudes around life in general, and this ability to have these really good conversations, to learn about people, to build that empathy and respect in the world. And so we just had to have you guys on to learn more about you both. And then Shafiq, we met you after, but again, instant connection, I would say, for sure.
Yeah.
And so thank you really. We really feel really grateful to have you both share your time with us today.
It's always exciting to find other folks engaging in this work. And that's something that we really value, especially when we work across the province, is just thinking about how we can pick up all those different connections, right? And just really think about, the work that we're doing, your organization's doing, all the other kinds of folks that are in a similar space, pushing in the same direction.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So, maybe I'll start with you, Shafiq. Like, what got you into this organization? And why do you feel, I mean, obviously we know why we do this work, but like everyone has their own story as to, what brought you into this space. If you don't mind sharing a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share. We have a funny saying within our organization. It's like, once you join Harmony, you never leave Harmony. And I think that statement has rung true for me. So I actually have a background as a teacher. And
Yes.
so I teach within the Toronto District School Board. I'm a member of OSSTF, so I'm a high school teacher. And, that's been something that I've been engaging in for a number of years now. And actually, Harmony Movement was my first job right out of Teachers College that I got about 11 years ago or so. So I started out at that point in time, and a lot of the things that had led me in my path up to kind of starting off at Harmony Movement were really focused around like this equity, anti-racism space, especially when it comes to like engaging students, young people, and working within school communities. So a lot of my inspiration was to become an educator, to be able to make those differences, to be that type of teacher that some of them that I did have, others that I didn't have when I was growing up, and to make sure that when we're working with this new generation, this young generation, that we're able to kind of support them, uplift them, work towards building up our communities and establishing a sense of like power and resilience, and thinking about how we can continue to shape the experiences of our young people and our generations to come. So that's a lot of the inspiration that I had. I remember I was at like a volunteer opportunity, and one of the managers of Harmony Movement at that time was there, and she kind of heard me ranting about something in terms of like politics or society or something like that. And she's like, "Hey, you're you have an interesting perspective. Like, come in and do an interview with us." And
Nice.
we kind of started off from there.
That's so great. That's so great. And I love that, you took that teaching because, getting a teaching degree, most people think, okay, I'm going to get into the classroom and I'm going to do that. But that you've sort of like become really focused in this area. And
Well,
I'm sure you lend it to the classroom. That's
I've
great.
had a great opportunity to be able to have some flexibility here. So I did work with Harmony Movement for a couple of years, and there's so many interesting things that I learned just traveling all across Ontario and going to places that I've never been to before. Even though I lived my whole life in Toronto, there's certain like a very big difference in terms of like that
Oh, yeah.
that culture. So did a couple years. I left Harmony Movement to go pursue my in-classroom teaching, and then for the last almost 5 years now, we kind of have been in a position where I've been kind of balancing both. So it's been exciting, it's been engaging, and it's been nice to have that sense of being able to have that flexibility as well.
Amazing. Sounds like great organization to be a part of, to be able to do that too, to balance the two. Okay, so Taraneh, tell us about yourself. Tell us what brought you to Harmony, and even any background on your kind of why to being in this space.
I want to say the why, it goes very like way back. I would say I migrated here when I was about 15, 16. So there was a big shift in my life happen and a lot to understand. But I think it also gave me a very unique perspective to be able to kind of be between two worlds and understand and try to find the bridge between the two and understand how do we have these difficult conversation, or how do I reconcile with two different types of truths and bringing two different communities or conversation together. And as I kind of progress, I did my studies in international development, thinking I want to work with people, I want to create positive change. But being a young folk, we wanted to do it on an international scale and see what that looks like. And as part of my study, one thing I realized is I love working in grassroots. As much as it's fun to travel between countries and do these projects, really what brings joy is seeing the impact on the grassroots, working with communities, being within a community and seeing it change over time. So really a beginning of my career was a lot of service providers and doing program management with grassroots organizations. And I was looking for a conscious change into understanding the DEI sector, but specifically DEI sector in connection with youth. I work with youth for most of my life. I love working with them, and they bring quite a bit of joy to my life. So I really wanted to understand, what does the DEI conversation look like, or conversation around equity look like when it comes to the younger folks, and what is their vision? How do we navigate that? And I came across Harmony Movement about a year and a half ago. More than that, it's going to be almost 2 years. And it's been a great learning for me, and a way to contribute. It is a great organization to work with. I would want to second what you said, Andrea, and really engaging in this conversation across the board. So not only with the students, but also with adults, educators, parents, and caregivers, to see, okay, we all have this collective goal of we want to live in a better society. We want a space that we all feel welcome, we feel included. What does that look like? What do we actually need to do? And planning things, planning initiatives, planning individualized actions to create that change one step at a time. And I think it goes back to the why of, I know there are different perspectives. I've experienced living through different perspectives. And the only way that anything can work is when we come together, we share, and we try to find that commonality to move forward.
So I have a question. I think what you said was really important. It's kind of like, well, it is. You're going in and you're, in front of these students, and Shafiq, you as well, because you're in the classroom. But when you initially go in and you start talking about this stuff, what's your first measure? Like, when you're asking these students, are they coming up to you and talking about some of the challenges? Are they open to receiving this kind of information? I'd love to know where their headspace is when you first start these conversations with them. And I guess it could be either one of you could answer that.
I feel like we might have a slightly different perspectives, but from what I've seen, I go in with this assumption that every kid that is in that room wants to create positive change. Like that's inherently within them, that they want to see a better world for themselves, a better school, whatever that looks like. But there's always hesitation because we are these strangers who walked in and they don't know anything about us. And they also assume that we don't want to know anything about them. And we want to just tell them what to do. So the way to kind of break that is to actually get to know them. Start by introducing ourselves and actually being vulnerable about who we are and why we're there, but also spending time to get to know them and letting them know that their voice actually matters. So I usually, my favorite types of workshops is where I go in and I have an opportunity to have a conversation with the students to see, okay, what do you see? What do you think is the issue is that we need to address? I'm not going to tell you what the issue is, even though, I've had conversations with your teachers and admin, and I know some of the things that are going on, but what are you seeing that you think is problematic or it can be improved? And working through that lens of, okay, you recognize this, now let's work through and see what we can do together. And I'm there to give you tools. I'm there to give you space to discuss and think and come up with your own version of what the solution is.
And
how about you, Shafiq? What do you find?
Well, Taraneh did an excellent job capturing that feeling that when we walk into a space where when we start to engage with a new group, it definitely requires some warming up at the starting point, right? And I think that's a big part of the work is just having our young people look at that potential and that opportunity within that space and that time of, am I just passively receiving information here, or are we like actively engaging and co-creating with one another? And I feel like once we get into that space and we have that recognition, it's really interesting and inspiring as well to think about, not only the students sharing their experiences, detailing the issues and concerns, but also the solutions that they have ready, right? The ideas that they're able to come up with. And, sometimes it requires a little bit more like formalizing and structuring and helping them kind of like organize their thoughts. Sometimes they have something where they're like, we need to do this. And you're like, yeah, that's amazing. Let's make it happen. Right. And so on that basis, I think there's just something that's so, interesting whenever we go to schools, and especially since we're like working at a scale in which we like are in very different types of schools, communities, is just to be inspired by like those students, ideas and how they bring them forward and looking at the potential of what our young people can create and start to shape up for us to learn from. So that's something that I'm always kind of like trying to tune into. And, Taraneh and I sometimes have our debates in terms of like how much we ask them versus how much we share, like, here's an example. And so we kind of go back and forth, but always love that as part of the dynamic in terms of, just being open to everybody's style and everybody's method of engagement, working to the best way that works for them.
Yeah. And you know what I find even when we do our stuff too is more and more, and I don't know if it's like just generational or if it's like the social media stuff, but like students are so hesitant to share, right? And I mean, I remember being that uncomfortable, high school, like, not everyone's ready to be like, yeah, let me tell you about my experience. And yeah, I'll talk about where I think I have privilege. And you know what I mean? Like I get it. Like I get and it's just being a teen and feeling, a bit insecure. But like sometimes it's like really trying to like pull it out of them and being like, it's okay to share. Like you want to create a safe environment for them to feel like they can, but it does take time. Like, do you guys feel that sometimes, like just to get them to like actually start to open up?
Yeah, it's really different from group to group, as you mentioned. sometimes they are like ready and willing, and they'll jump right into it. And sometimes you have to catch up to to their speed. And other
Yeah.
times, yeah, it takes a lot of coaxing, and we do a lot of co-facilitation, which is always really fun. And sometimes we'll turn to each other and be like, yeah, what's going on with these kids right now? Like, it's not catching on, it's not landing. And then we
Yeah.
kind of do a little bit of that, like adjustments on the spot. And we're all like kind of fairly good on our feet, and kind of just think, okay, let's throw this thing in, or let's make them play this game, or just kind of open them up in different ways. But Taraneh, I know you've had different experiences than I have. I do a lot of like the work with some of the older students, and especially with like the educators. But yeah, I wonder what your kind of approach has been in terms of just getting them to open up.
Yeah, I think the younger kids tend to be more open, but
Oh, for sure.
without, their openness is not always very directed at what is happening at the space. So some of those sharings can go wild and you
Yes.
have to just roll with it. So I definitely find it much easier to engage the younger folks. And the older folks, from my perspective, it has a lot to do with whether they believe we see the value in what they're contributing.
Yeah.
I think they are in this world that their ideas, their perspectives are being dismissed so frequently. And, think of the way the social media works. Like, you put something out there and maybe no one will pay attention to it. So, or just get dismissed, or, worse, being attacked in some ways. So building that trust, then what you just say, like, your perspective, your voice actually matters and values. And it's not just a statement that we say that your voice matters. We really believe in it, and bringing it into the way that we tie in all of their voices together, or actually taking it and letting those conversations lead of what's happening in the space, is what allow people to open up. And honestly, simple as like acknowledging what they are contributing is important, what they're contributing, how it's adding to the overall workshop day.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I know we've been with some of the younger, like elementary, and yeah, the elementary school, like they just want to tell you everything about their whole life, which is like so cute. But yeah, I think it's the older they get, they start reserving, and that comes with even just being more mature and understanding what to share, what not to share. But yeah, so it seems like it's similar for us as well.
I think that also, well, one of the things I feel is that there's been such a rapid change and development in this space that sometimes, like, even for myself, like, I'm going to even use myself as an example, just trying to catch up with the changes in the DEI space, and what is proper, what isn't. Sometimes that can make me hesitant with respect to what I'm willing to share or how I'm willing to share it, because I want to be respectful in the space that I'm in and the people that I'm with. So I sometimes find, because Andrea and I also do an anti-oppression and allyship and an equity inclusion presentation for a lot of high school kids. And sometimes I find that it's the lack of education that they have because of what has changed and they haven't caught up to it, that prevents them from participating, because they are afraid that they might say something that is offensive or wrong, or what they're saying is not important, or their voice doesn't matter, right? We're trying to, like, kind of what you're saying. So how do you feel with respect to kind of how things are evolving and how that's changing in these settings when you're with your students?
It's interesting because, as I mentioned, I do a lot of the educator training and adult ed as well. Of course, Taraneh also does that work too. But the sentiment that you described, I've seen that, Shar, definitely, like amongst our young people, right? Especially like when we get into like a serious tone, or like a more serious topic of conversation. Like they're very conscious. They know the tone, like is more significant, and I want to match it, but I'm not exactly sure what to say. So I've experienced that too. But on the whole, I usually find that feeling is more so present amongst us as adults.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
We're the ones that are much more nervous about saying the wrong thing and being misinterpreted. And I often actually wade into that as like a direct activity and conversation within sessions that I do in terms of the adult ed side of things. Working with our young people, like I mentioned, like if there's a very serious tone to the conversation, that dynamic can be there. But it's interesting. They usually kind of are so immersed in this type of way of thinking and like the content that they consume on a regular basis, the type of engagement and conversations that are present amongst their social circles, right? They might be very conscious and aware of understanding what is anti-oppression, what is allyship, what is equity, maybe not necessarily the specific terminology or particular exact frameworks, but that lingo is something that's been kind of a part of them understanding their own identities and how they grow up. And I feel like there's a lot of different reasons for that, right? Like, for example, just thinking about identity, I feel like the space around being more open and embracing gender diversity and looking at pronouns and sharing that is definitely something that's part of like this young generation's lexicon generally.
Totally.
I feel like obviously there's different periods and times. I know that we've all been through it when we were younger as well, but world events, looking at a situation in Palestine, for example, thinking about what that means, like how do you process this information, how do you understand and orient yourself around what's happening there. And so, these are the kind of questions that I think that they're regularly exposed to. So in a lot of ways, I feel like we have so much to learn from our young people, right? They're
I
much more,
agree.
courageous in that sense. And I feel like as adults, we're the ones that kind of shrink back from these conversations and get overly concerned with what people will hear, or if we could say the wrong thing, to the point that we often end up remaining silent on a lot of really critical conversations.
I'm glad you said that though, because I think you're right. Like I find myself personally, when I am engaging in these conversations with these students in the classroom, I like asking questions. Like I want to read the room. So
Mhm.
I ask questions to kind of find out where everybody's at and what they're comfortable sharing and, what their understanding of it is, because it also, like you said, different groups have different ideas and maybe some are more open than others, but just asking questions so I don't want to say blend in, but then at least I know where to start with these students, right? I feel like that happens a lot. It's not consistent across the board. It really does change from the dynamics of the classroom and what part of the city you find yourself in, what part of Ontario you're finding yourself in. Like you said, I'm sure that all changes. So I'm so glad that you said that, because I kind of feel like I'm doing the same thing. And I was so glad when you guys said that you wanted to be a part of this podcast, because for me, this is still such a huge place of learning for me. Like, even though we're able to do what we do in the classrooms with SHISM, with SHSM in the classrooms, it is constantly on my mind when I am having conversations and when I'm listening to people, because I realize how much I still don't know. And that's just me being vulnerable and very very clear and open with you guys. Is that it's still such a place of learning for me.
Mm-hmm.
I would
I
say
agree.
it remains a place of learning for all of us. I don't think there's ever going to be an endpoint that we all say, okay, we're done learning about this. So, Shar, I just want to share that, I feel the same. I sometimes come from a workshop and it's like, ooh, there's these elements that I need to look into more. I need to maybe find a better language to explain it, or we need a better language to explore it with the students, or, oh, I wasn't sure what that meant specifically. So there will always be these elements of us learning. I think that openness and vulnerability with the students also very key, because they are very used to someone being, telling them what needs to happen. Whereas when we admit that we are also learning with you, or sometimes just saying, I actually don't know. Like, what do you think? Let's think about it together. That again brings back to that creating that trust, right? Letting the student know we're here to learn together. We might have a little bit more of a knowledge about it, or more of a expertise in how to navigate it, but at the end of the day, we are all learning together. And one of the ways that I try to do this, like if someone shares something that is actually new to me, I would mention it. I was like, oh, I didn't know this, thank you, for letting me know. I'm going to look into this more. So those little micro moments where we are also vulnerable with them and we admit that we are learning, it leads back to that conversation we were having earlier about bringing student in and allowing them to open up and share more.
Right.
I 100% agree. And that's why with everything we do, because I mean, the DEI of our program is small. Most of what we do is in the SEL, like social emotional learning, but I mean, they play so similar to each other, right? Like we're here talking about empathy and talking about compassion and self-awareness. And so that's kind of where we always start. It's like, let's be self-aware and let's start understanding who we are and what are our lenses, how do we show up every day in the world, like what's important to us. And so when like that's usually where we start with the kids and letting them know, like, I don't know what it's like to be a 16-year-old in 2025 in, Brampton. Like, I don't know. Like, I was born many years ago and high school looked very different. Like, this stuff wasn't even like whispered about in when I was in school. Like, and so, I mean, you knew that there was injustices and oppression and racism was massive when I was younger. And you heard the appropriate discussions and comments and joke, but like you didn't do anything about it. Like there was no feeling of empowerment to use your voice. And so even like, I'll be honest, when we were invited to start to do more of this work with the SEL bringing into the DEI space, like I had a hard time. Like I said to Shar, I'm like, I don't know if I have a voice. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, I am a white woman who has a lot of privilege. Like that I'm just going to be honest. And so how can I show up in this space and help students see and understand? And so like, this is when like, she like gave me a piece of pie of like, you do have a voice. You have an allyship voice, number one. And this is a place to learn. And so we did get trained. Like we needed to have formal training, and I know we talked to you about our training, but we got formal training. And I think, yeah, like just being that person to start the conversations and get these students to understand. But I try to be very vulnerable and open and honest with my experience, and know that like my experience is mine, yours experience is yours. And that empathy is not saying I know what it's like to be in your shoes, because I don't know what it's like to be in their shoes, but I believe you when you tell me what it's like to be in your shoes. Right? Like that's such a big difference. And when it was explained to me like that, I was like, yes, I do. Like that's the difference. Like I'm not going to sit here and be like, yeah, I know what it's like to to be oppressed. Like I mean, from a female perspective, yes, I know from a female oppression perspective for sure, but any other way. And I'm like, no, but I can believe you when you tell me what it's like to live in your shoes, and I can listen and I can lend a voice when appropriate. And I could, so that's how we try to describe it. And so I see a lot of nods. So I think, so please jump in.
I think for me, what you said around the empathy being actually the core of DEI work. Without empathy, without that being able to recognize other people's experiences and acknowledge it and say, I don't know what it feels like to be, experience your experience, but I can understand the feelings that come up when you do experience that. It's such a core part. And I think I was very conscious of that when I was creating the Words Matter campaigns, to think about before we address any of these issues that we are hoping to address through our work, is we need to build the basis of one, who are we? Do you recognize who you are? Do you understand yourself? Are we allowed to understand the experience of others? If those two pieces are in place, okay, now you feel there is a opportunity to do something about it and take action and create change in that way. So I would say what you shared is the basis of what DEI is. And
Yeah.
we go from there.
Yeah. Then we shouldn't go wrong.
Well, you know what? And
We'll try not to.
Taraneh, we met at that at the symposium that happened at that school in Richmond Hill, and our presentation was about like loving yourself, because at the end of the day, the truth is that if you don't love who you are, it doesn't matter how you identify. If you don't love who you are, then how is it that you can go out and love others for who they are? Because we are all brought up with stories and programs and belief systems. And if we don't understand how that has impacted us in our own self identity, and you know what parts of it we love and what parts of it we might need to change to navigate through this world, then we're really lost. So that self awareness piece for us becomes really big. It's probably the epicenter of everything that we do. And, you know, I think with the work that all of us are doing, uh, it's important to understand that we kind of have to work on an inside out approach, right? Where we are feeling good about everything that we are, everything that we've experienced, you know, good or bad, because it's shaped us to be who we are. Like, can we love and accept who we are right now so that we can be that same empathetic, compassionate, loving individual towards others as well? So I really love that that's kind of the foundation of the things that we are doing in our work.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so, Taraneh, I'd love to know a little bit more about that campaign, like the words matter. Like, can you explain it a little bit more and kind of maybe describe like what you do when you're doing these presentations or workshops, or what's the kind of basis?
Sure. So really the Words Matter campaign came out of us hearing all the issues that are happening in this different schools across Ontario, specifically in regards to discriminating language.
Yeah.
We've heard an increased rise in the use of slurs. We've heard from every school that we visited in the past 2 years that the language that the students are using has shifted in a way that is quite harmful, and it's more prominent than ever. We work with our Inclusive School Action Network, which is a coalition of different educators, admins that, you know, they come together once a month, and they really like spearheaded this campaign and saying, this is something we need to address. This is something that it's going on everywhere, and we need to do something about it. So really put our head together to see, okay, what does that look like? What support can we provide for the schools to be able to address this? Because we know suspensions are not working. We know the way that we are going about addressing it is not creating any long-term change or any cultural shift. So we kind of created a package of resources for the school to access. This becomes, you know, malleable for them. They get the resources, they get a set of workshops and trainings for the whole school community. So from the educators to the students to the parents and caregivers, for them to get this package, and they pledge to create change in their school. And what that looks like is, first and foremost, everyone to intervene when they hear this language. You know, whether you're a student, specifically if you're a teacher and admin, if you hear this, interrupt immediately. There's no, you know, leeway with that if we are committing to actually interrupting. And then bringing in that education piece. Let's actually understand why this is harmful. Why are we, where is this coming from? And what do we do to repair the harm that has been done? And how do we integrate everyone back to the school community? How do we come, you know, out of this instances or these incidents as a collective, rather than now individual feeling isolated, feeling harmed by what has happened? Or even if you're the person who has done the harm, how do you feel not alienated by your school, and you feel there's an opportunity for you to come back and repair the harm and continue learning together? And it's been a wonderful first year. We've had about
Great.
125 schools sign up, and they've
Amazing.
taken ownership of what this campaign looks like. it looks very different from school to school, how they went about implementing it. We had a Words Matter Day for 21st of May last year, how they went to celebrate the positive power words. That was like kind of the theme for that day. It looked very different from school to school, from art pieces that they created, song, dances, paintings, really students kind of taking on this message. And one of the most beautiful thing I've heard from this campaign was student now using words matter as a shorthand when someone is using the language. It's like, hey, words matter. And that is like an easy access way for them to address what's going on, because we've talked with schools to see how it's going, but also we've had opportunities to go into school to deliver the workshops for them. So whether it be a student conference style or a workshop for their student leaders, we've had those conversations also with the students and the educators as well. And the students are hearing it every day in every corner of their school. They're hearing all forms of discriminating language. A lot of slurs has become so normalized across different ages, and they know how it's impacting them, and they feel the heaviness that it has created in their school. But on the positive side, they also want to do something about it. So from different initiatives that they've created, creating Words Matter clubs, really kind of taking ownership and saying, we need to create change, and we are responsible, and we just don't pass it on to a teacher or admin, but we're going to address it within ourselves as well. So that kind of is, the whole campaign.
That sound, and the fact that, like having that, like 2 words to even, like, as soon as someone says, hey, words matter, like, and then they know what that means, that's a movement right there. Like,
it's clever.
So, like, where do you think the rise in this is coming from? Like, I don't know, Shafiq, like, if you have any, like, because I know you're in the classrooms as well, like at the high school level, and like, where do you think this rise is coming from?
Yeah, and that's been a lot of the conversations we've had, especially in terms of like planning and considering like what the approaches are that we'll take, that Taraneh illustrated here. And I feel like there's definitely a different era that we're in now, pre and post pandemic era learning, that whole online era, students just interacting on a virtual level, not being in person. Like, I think that's like kind of like a bookend, before and after. And
it's always that. It's like pre-post COVID. It's crazy.
Exactly. Well, I mean, it shifted our society in so many different ways, right? So within the school community context, right, I think that there's been a significant shift ever since we had students returning from that era of online learning. So again, like we regularly like talk about this. We're like, what is it with that? And in terms of Harmony's history, like you mentioned, we've been around for a few decades now, and so like this is a nothing that has never come up before, right? Like obviously there's always been aspects of us trying to address like hate speech, discriminatory language, using like slurs, and engaging in identity-based bullying. But the prevalence of it, how often it's come up for us, how much the educators and administrators across Ontario that contact us to get support on this piece, like we definitely noticed a huge spike, fortunately, in the last few years. And so I think there's a number of reasons that contribute to that. Obviously, like I mentioned, right, like just the era of online learning, I think that just changed our brains as a society, and especially with our young ones. The fact is that because they didn't have as much of a life before, it had a greater influence on them. So imagine you go from seeing people in person to interacting, and your entire medium is through a virtual space. And so obviously that doesn't just get limited to like your Zoom classrooms or your Google Classrooms, right? Then that also carries forward in terms of social media, influences on like YouTube and content that's being consumed. And then just kind of interacting with each other through that like virtual lens, I think has really shifted perspective. So we mentioned, the infusion of like social and emotional learning with equity and inclusive practice. And I feel like that is where we gain greater depth, is when we appreciate it and infuse those two pieces together. But the fact is that if I'm interacting with you online, or if I don't even know who you are, if you're just like a random username, it's not even a name, it's just like some, combination of words and numbers. Obviously I'm not going to have the ability to even have compassion toward you. You're just some other entity, right? And so I feel like there's definitely been a massive influence in terms of bringing those interactions, having a global level influence in terms of the language and the terms that were used, being exposed to this kind of hate speech and rhetoric around like anti-equity, anti-inclusive, anti-woke type of perspectives that have really kind of taken a foothold throughout North American society, having that influence. And then when we came back to the classroom, having that translate into the face-to-face interactions. Now I'm used to interacting with you in the online space. I'm going to carry forward that similar type of dynamic in person. And one of the things that I've been very shocked to see with my high school students in the last few years is sometimes they don't know each other's names, like in the same classroom, right? And this is like months into a course, which was like completely, confounding for me, because I remember, I went to a fairly large high school. I went to school in Toronto. We had about like 1,600 students in our school. And I knew like almost everybody's names in my same grade. And then a bunch of kids like 1 year up, and then some of them 1 year down too, right? So the fact is that now we have students sitting in the same classroom of like, 30 students, and I play a lot of games with my students, and they'll have to like, refer to each other's names or say so and so is, do something, and they'll be like, oh, the kid in the red shirt, or like the kid wearing the hat. And I'm like, what? Like how do you not know each other's names at this point? And even sometimes they have multiple classes together. So not to go too far down that road, but I do think that kind of illustrates the foundation in which now we have that influence, we have those dynamics established. There's a lack of recognition and relationship building, which means that the sense of community in the classroom is definitely in a weaker place than it maybe had been in the past. And so all these things are kind of preconditions in my mind to giving rise to the huge spike and the huge increase of the use of this type of harmful language and discriminatory terms, and how much we have to actually take that effort as educators to really be focused on intervention. It's even more important now than it ever has been before.
Oh, I think you hit the nail on the head. In that it's so much about the lack of communication because of how they were learning for a few years, and just the culture of online. That's how they talk to each other, texting.
Comment, like responding to comments, and it's always inflammatory, right? Like
exactly,
group chats, and you're just sending memes now. You're not even
and it's
and
it's like you're missing that humanness, right? So you're right. If you don't know someone's name, if you don't even know what they look like, or you haven't even paid attention to what they look like, then it's so much easier to say a hurtful thing because you don't know anything about them. And actually, so my daughter's in she's going to grade 11, and in her grade 9 gym class, they did self-defense. And one of the things, this just came up, was one of the things that the instructor said is that studies show that if you look at your, what am I trying to say? Like the person who's trying to harm you, whoever attacker. If you look at that person in the eye, they are less likely to harm you. Like, because as soon as you look at someone in the eye, you see their humanity, and all of a sudden it's this like hormonal, like oxytocin, like, because we're very science-based. So that oxytocin exchange happens. And it's not saying that they won't still go ahead with it, but that, there was just some studies around like the less harm or their more ability to release you. If you look at them and say, please, like, can you please, and like right in the eye, right? And so, and that's what's lacking is like, we go into, and a lot of these students are down and they can't even make eye contact with us. So one of our big activities that we do, we don't get to do it all the time, but one of our favorite ones it's called speed friending. And if anyone's ever done speed dating, it's pretty much that, where we line them up in 2 rows. We give them each a piece of paper with like 40 questions. And we say, go, you have 90 seconds, talk to each other, shake hands, look at each other in the eye, introduce yourself, and ask each other questions on that page for 90 seconds. And it's amazing to see like what comes out of it. And you're right, Shafiq, like most of the people in that class didn't even know who their names. And all of a sudden now they know their favorite movie, they know their favorite food, they know where they went on their last vacation. Because, and so if we had more of that opportunity for them to get to know each other, because for us, like you said, Shabik, you knew your whole year and the year up and maybe a year down. Same here. Like we knew everybody. We talked. Like my daughter was looking through my old yearbooks and she's like, "You have so many signatures. Like you knew so many people." And it's like it's not like I was popular. It was just that's how we communicate. That's how we socialized. If we didn't talk to each other one on one, you didn't know. You didn't do anything. Now they socialize in front of a screen. And it's like, it's very different. And I'm not blaming. This isn't about blaming and shaming. It's just is what it is. And so this work is so important, right? It's like, how do we try to climb out of this? Because there's so much potential and they want it. They want it. Like when we say time's up with that game, they're all like, "Oh, we know we need more time. We need to talk." And I said, "Well, now you guys, when you see each other in the hallway, give each other a high five, look at each other in the eye and be like, hey, how's that? Did you see any more horror movies? I know you like horror movies. Like, now you have that commonality to connect, right?
Well,
So
then the other science behind it is you've just caused their dopamine to skyrocket, right?
Mhm.
And so the funny thing about social media is you can get your dopamine to skyrocket, but you also have huge dumps that happen as well, right? They're called the dopamine dumps that happen. In surge of dopamine and then it's gone and then you're looking for it again. This is social media. Whereas what we've been finding is that, again, with the speed friending, their dopamine is on a up level and it stays like that throughout the rest of our session with the kids, right? So they're all participating more, they're all having conversations, they're engaged in the activities, they want to participate more. And so again, just in that whole note about, being online and being stuck to your phone versus actually getting to know people, it's a massive difference, and mentally it's changing everybody.
And you know what? It's interesting because I think that young people now are growing to recognize more and more like these
Yeah.
influences. Like they're becoming more conscious and aware of it. There's more conversations about it. I know it's kind of like more in terms of reference of like the slang terminology that's used and like how much like kids like lead into those like new little slang words. But they refer to it as brain rot, right? And I think part of the brain rot, like the reference point to that, is that you've spent way too much time online.
Yeah.
Like instead of we used to say just go outside, like or get some fresh air, but they all say touch grass. So like I think there's reference points now that like are becoming more common amongst young people in the recognition of the overconsumption and overuse of social media and what kind of influence that does have on your psyche and on your regular day to day. And so when we think about that, like that's why I play games with my students often. I try to like put that as like a regular feature of my classroom, right? Because it is part of that community building piece and it does give way to other, aspects of students interacting with each other. And that obviously lends itself to their ability to, be a part of that classroom environment, feel like they belong, like have that recognition. And we all know that these things fundamentally, encourage students to learn in a much better, more supportive environment for them. And so, on that basis, I think that it's like we're not trying to just fight against the new trends. I think it's it's something that I've been a huge fan of always, and this is a practice that I have as a teacher is you got to mix the new school with the old school, right? And I really love combining both. So, for example, I'll be working with my students using tech. I encourage them and I teach them how to be able to use AI to like have like more in-depth research, for example, when I'm like, going through like our history class, for example, how to use it as a tool. But then at the same time, I also do the old school where like everything is like pencil and paper, right? And we're just kind of like talking and writing our answers down that way as well. So similarly, in terms of like their social interactions, right? Like, again, we have so many things that we can learn from our young ones in terms of, the group chat setting is something nice to think about, and I'm sure we're all part of at least like a few group chats ourselves.
Totally.
But, our young ones are involved in many of them, right? And so there is like that overstimulation aspect of like there's too many chats, but at the same time, at least you have a group that you can quickly access, right? And like,
Mhm.
engage with right away at any point. So that's positive in some ways. It could be used in a positive manner. So that's some of the new school stuff, but also we have to combine it with the old school stuff, and we have to like get them outside of those things that they're used to and get them outside of the comfort zone. I mean, like also as a society, I feel like it's so funny, not to be too critical, but like I think a lot of people, even for example, like in terms of ordering, like if you can have a system in a restaurant where you don't have to talk to anybody, like people tend to start to prefer that now, right? So
Yeah,
I feel like there's so many of these new ways that we kind of have to bring back that old school approach
Of
and also
course.
embrace some of the positives with the new school approach as well. And so I feel like that's a call, I think about that as being a teacher. And like I think it's a call to action for all of us as educators to remember that, there are valuable things with what our young people are doing now that we need
yeah,
to adapt to and we need to incorporate. But also remembering that, and I think this has been, something I have to be very conscious of personally, right? It's like they didn't have the experiences we had, right?
hmm
They won't have the same types of defaults. They won't automatically react in the same ways in which we will because they didn't have those same experiences as us. So we actually have to create the environment to stimulate that way of learning and growing and to encourage and to push students doing something like that speed friending. I love that terminology. It's a great way to go about it. And like you said, right, as soon as we start to engage with it, the students all of a sudden recognize like how great it feels and how much they enjoy that process. So
Mhm.
combining these two efforts will be really, really good. And so, there's definitely a lot of work that we need to do as educators and supporting students. And I think we need to like kind of adapt and catch up in these ways.
Mhm.
I agree. And the idea of bringing the adults into the conversation is huge, right? Because we could definitely educate and help and bring in new terms and initiatives into their minds, but if they go home or they go into another classroom and they're hearing different information, which especially the household is very influential, especially those younger years, then it's almost like defeating the purpose,
Mhm.
right? So we definitely love when we get the opportunity to speak to parents, like when schools are like, hey, come in and do something with the students, and then can you do like a parent night? And we're like, yes, let us. Now the obstacle there is not every parent that should be there will be there.
Mhm.
It's those that usually are more engaged, usually are already into this type of information. But that's okay. We're all about the ripple effect, and one's going to hear it, and then the other one's going to pass it along. And as long as we can help one, it's great. But yeah, and Shafiq, you said like as parents, we grew up in such a different world as our parents did. And so for us to be like I was telling my daughter the other day, I'm like, you'll never know what it's like to have to call your friend and ask for them with their parents on the phone. Like say, hi, Miss so and so, can I speak to Andrea, please? Like that was my life. Like even when I met my husband for the first time, I'll never forget having to call and speak to my mother-in-law, and she didn't even speak English. And I was like, hi, can I? And like that feeling of like needing to get past your fear. And I'm like, you'll never know what that's like because you all have phones. And I mean, you'll know what it's like to probably meet them for the first time, and that'll be challenging, but like that was our daily life. So understanding like how we can like use some of those old school things that we grew up with that were developmental skill development, social skill development, and then but also understand like they don't even know the language, like it is so foreign to them.
Mhm.
Well,
And like because of course
yeah.
I got the eye roll, like my daughter's like, oh, whatever.
Well, speaking about
Sorry.
language, right? Like I think that's where, we have to take that call to action seriously as
Yeah.
educators. The ways in which we understand this and thinking about those generational dynamics and the shifts has a massive impact on our approach. And then of course that then creates those influences amongst our young ones. So thinking about that, piece around addressing harmful language, for example, like we're talking about in terms of the Words Matter campaign, and Taraneh mentioning the fact that we have like resources and training sessions for educators to think about how they practice with a number of different scenarios, right? And going back to Shar, what we were talking about earlier in terms of like adults being kind of nervous about engaging in
Mhm.
meaning, right? The fact is that like if you don't understand the importance of this, right? We all want us to think like students use like a racial slur, like, are engaging in hate speech towards a classmate, or even just kind of generally just throwing it out there. And what happens when an educator doesn't say anything? They pretend like they didn't hear it.
Mm-hmm.
They maybe try to say like, okay, cut it out. Let's get back to our lesson, or only one person at a time speaking, as opposed to like actually addressing the matter. Or maybe they try to say something, or they kind of scold the student, but they don't actually address the issue itself, right? Like all different ways of, in a manner, kind of avoiding addressing the issue directly, right? So let's think about what happens in that context. Obviously, our young people, they're looking to us in so many different ways in terms of how to model behavior, what is and what is not acceptable in these settings, and how things are approached and responded to will shape that on a day-to-day basis. I know how it feels when we're exhausted, when we're tired, when there's so many demands and pressures. Like, let's be honest, right? Like at the provincial level within Ontario, we have been suffering as a result of endless cuts to education. And really in the last year or two in particular, these things have seemed to compound, and we're like feeling the effects of cuts from several years, right? So I know it's exhausting. I get that part. And when we hear, these terms being used so frequently, it could be really something that kind of beats us down and wears us down in our ability to be able to address. We might even become desensitized to those terms as educators, as adults. But nevertheless, we have to remind ourselves what happens when we don't say anything, right? We're sending a message actively. And if we're engaging with the matter, or when we're not. And so I want us to now consider on the flip side, right? What might happen if you do address the situation seriously, right? If you take the time to pause and be like, what was said right now is not okay. And why? And kind of go through it. When you recognize, the harm that has occurred to a student that might be on the receiving end or being targeted for who they are, even for others just witnessing that, right? And then thinking about also the students that are using the language, right? We don't want to villainize them. These are young people. They have every opportunity to be able to learn, to shift their practice, and to change and make better decisions, and inviting them to be able to do so, right? So when we take these kinds of steps, we send a very clear message to our students, which then hopefully the more people that engage in that practice within a school starts to shift the entire community dynamic, that not only are these things not acceptable, but it goes in complete opposition to the direction that we want to head into. So it's a matter of intervening every single time, like Taraneh was mentioning, right? There shouldn't be a reason why you ignore it, even though we know that there are factors that might prevent or reduce our capacity. And when we do intervene, when we do address those issues, it's not just staying there. It's not just cutting out the parts that are negative or harmful, but it's also actively building up that sense of community like we've been talking about. And I also feel like there's something that's really interesting that I've started to come to terms with, especially in the last 5 years when I've been re-engaging with the work of Harmony Movement directly, is the power of, constantly repeating what are the things that we aspire to. Right? Using language that is affirming, that is uplifting, that, makes people feel good about themselves and one another, right? The fact is that if we keep on repeating and going back to these aspirational statements and really kind of painting the picture of the direction that we constantly want to head toward, I do believe that has power. And I think that is part of being able to kind of shift and create that type of environment that we want to see within our school communities. It's going to involve collaboration with our families, right? We're going to have to be on the same page. It's going to have to focus on being strategic in terms of how we approach those conversations around the types of diversity that exist within our school communities, right? And to embrace and to capture as many students' identities within that aspect as well. And you know what, like Taraneh said, right? We have some positive examples, and I'd love to have maybe you share a couple more with folks here in terms of what actually shifts and changes once we start to have those students using that language. But ultimately, we know that the worst possible thing that you could do is to do nothing. Try, at least push yourself. It's going to feel uncomfortable no matter what we do. But just like we tell our students to step up to that challenge, to really push themselves, we also have to do that at this point as well as educators.
Set the example. Yeah. Taraneh, did you want to add anything to that?
I mean, I'm just trying to kind of a lot of the things was shared, I think for me goes back to that whole school approach, right? The only way to create actual change is for everyone to be involved. And
Yes.
I keep thinking back about this one parents and caregiver workshop that I was facilitating, and this parent, and there was this discussion going on around media and kids' access to online spaces, specifically gaming spaces, and how they were like, we don't know what to do. Like, I'm at lost. I don't know what's happening. I don't understand it fully. I know I need to do something about it, but it's the question of where to start. And one parent started, another parent's chime in. It's like, I'm having the same issue. This is kind of the conversation we're having, but I'm dealing with this challenges. And it was this conversation around collectively as a community of parents and caregivers. They knew there is so much to learn about the online spaces, the gaming spaces, and what the kids are being exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
But also, it's a question of we all also feel, there's so much going on that we don't know where to start. So I think it's the way that I've seen it, the Words Matter camp has given people an entry point. It is just the beginning of this conversation. So for the parents to just even have understanding of what are the words that are being used in the school, what is happening, and then being able to recognize when kids are engaging or being exposed to these words, what are the different avenues, in what spaces they're being exposed to, and then understanding, okay, what does intervention look like, what these conversation starters look like. And I think there are a few of these changes within the students that I've seen, right? For them to get that acknowledgement that what they're feeling from being targeted by this language, or just even hearing in their school, is that feeling is very real. We do this exercise with them where they kind of write out those feelings, and then we get them to tear it up to kind of let it go. And I've heard so many students are like, oh, that felt good. I do want to replace these words. Now we think about, okay, what are those words specifically are? What do you want to feel in your school? And we've seen students taking on initiatives that really trying to push not only about decreasing the use of the language, but what Shafiq said around the power of positive words. What do we need to replace it? Let's give them words to use instead. If we are trying to create these bonds of friendships and bonds through words that are really harmful, intentionally or unintentionally, we need another tool for the kids, the same way we need another tool for the parents and caregivers and educators. And I think that collective conversation is what will really create the change for us and for us to see. And again, it goes back to what we said earlier, like giving them the ownership over creating this change. What does that look like for them? What are they capable of doing? What do they feel it's the right decision to do for their school and for their school community, and allowing them to do that.
Yeah, that's very empowering, right? And it reminds me of that saying, be the change that you want to see, right? So, right, if that's what you want, then that's how you empower them. Like, if you want to see a change in the world, then like start with you, right? It only takes one person, right, to create that ripple effect. So I love that.
Yeah, I do want to recognize like that individual change is important, the same way that the community change is important, but systemic change is also very important.
Yes.
Like the individuals can change as much as one, the students can address it, but if systematically nothing is changing, it becomes very difficult. And I think, we've been working with a lot of school boards across Ontario and a few school boards even outside of Ontario to see what the campaign looked like for them. And one of our school boards, the Hastings Prince Edward District, where, they included this framework around addressing and intervening into their procedures that will be released for the whole board. So thinking about now everyone needs to kind of follow this. What are those systematic things that we need to do? Principals starting to think about, okay, what else needs to be done? Are we addressing the policies? Because the students notice. I've had sessions, the students notice the policies are problematic. So how do we change those? So I just want to kind of highlight, I love and I support individual change, community change, but that systemic change is what really will create the shift. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. And like we talk about it almost like it's got to start at the CEO level, and whatever that CEO is, right? Whether it's CEO of your household, CEO of the school, CEO of the school board, like who's making this, how high up can we go in the decision makers?
Mhm.
Because you're absolutely right. Like the grassroots stuff, the individual stuff, 100%. But it's a hard hill to climb if it's just here, right? Like it needs to get up, and that's fantastic that there's some boards that are taking that seriously and really seeing what they can do from the top level. Yeah, wouldn't it be nice if everything was like that? So we'll keep trying. We're gonna keep working on it.
Well, the great thing is that there's so many folks working in this way, and
Yes.
a lot of people that aspire to see these changes. And so we also have been like really uplifted from the examples and the implementation of this work. And also, let's be honest, right? Like Taraneh mentioned, this came out of our Inclusive Schools Action Network, right? So these are like our progressive educators, our support staff, our board level staff, our administrators who work in many different school boards across Ontario. And this wouldn't have happened without their work, their effort, their contributions, their experience, their wisdom, being able to kind of pull these things together. These approaches are not reinventing the wheel entirely, not starting from square one, right? But kind of bringing together what we know has been successful practice. So there's so many inspiring moments that we get as well when we're like in these meetings recapping, hearing those stories and examples, and just kind of, it's really, heartfelt, and it's really touching to see that, these shifts are starting to materialize as well. So we're really excited to continue to push into the new school year this fall, like launching year 2 of the campaign, and really pushing to kind of hone in on certain things. Like, one of the shifts that we're going to make to add in a layer of a bunch of more resources on specifically addressing anti-Black racist language. And then, in the, subsequent periods of time, maybe in the next year of the campaign, really looking at focusing on homophobic, transphobic, and ableist language as well, right? So, in this way, I just want to say that, so many people are working towards this, right? So I think one of the strengths of the campaign is tapping into that knowledge and that experience, but also bringing everybody together so we can hear each other, learn from each other, look at what's been successful, adopt and change and apply it to our own local circumstances. So I can't wait to see what happens in this new year of the campaign. And I'm really pumped up to see, the work continue to expand. And so, that's a part of why we call it a campaign, because as much as, schools can come to us and we have those resources and they can implement the training sessions and work with their students, work with their families, and have those conversations directly, it's also a matter of being able to use this as a collective approach where we can all kind of build everybody up at the same time.
Yeah,
I want
exactly.
to just add to that what Shafiq said in terms of community. I want to acknowledge that there are an amazing group of community partners that have really made this campaign to happen. We, going back to what Shar said about our limitation of how much we know and how much we can do, we always say we are not an identity, focused organization. So we need organizations and people who have these niche and specific topics and identities that they understand deeper and are able to engage in those conversations more. So really bringing in this group of, collaborators and partners, and from individuals to the whole organizations, to really think about what are these different ways, what are these elements of this issue we need to address that we might not be capable to do on our own. So that community really comes not only from changes in the school, but also the team or people who are really working to push this campaign is a community of organizations and individuals who are coming together. And I'm your organization being part of it and being included in this conversation as well. I think we can do a whole episode around you talking about how do you seek the connection of this issue around with the perspective of the science that you are much more expert in. How does that play out? And I have, I could have a list of questions, but I just want to say, I would just want to acknowledge that this is, for the community by a community. And I describe Harmony as like just the arms that helps to facilitate what's going on. But the reality is all of it comes from a much bigger collective than we are.
I agree 100%. And you're right. We could probably talk for another hour,
Yeah.
and maybe we do that another time. For sure. We would love to keep this conversation going. Clearly, we have a lot to say to each other on it and a lot to share. And I think a lot of you listening hopefully will take away from this conversation, and maybe ask yourself what you can do. What are you doing, and who could you speak to, and like who's your CEO, quote unquote, that can help shift this in your life in some way. So I would just like to thank you both again, really truly and deeply, for taking this time to talk to us. So much great stuff shared, and just let everyone know kind of where they can find more information about this campaign and others. I will include it in the description, but maybe just verbally let us know where we can find you all.
I think our website is the best place to go. So harmony.ca.
Perfect.
Right on top, you'll be able to read more about the campaign and reach out to us. Yeah.
That's great.
Amazing.
Thank you so much,
Thank you
Taraneh and
so
Shafiq.
much. It's been such a pleasure.
Shar, Andrea, such a great time talking with both of you.
Thank you.
It
Thank
was
you.
lovely. It was lovely. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. Till next time. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Stay tuned for our next episode. Have a wonderful day.